Okay, so here's your paper, and so let's share the screen to talk about your paper. Go like this here. Okay, so you can,
Yeah.
all right. So like, I mean, it's just basically go over, to talk about my comments in the paper and your thoughts and anything you want to talk about, I think what we have half an hour. Yeah. So, okay. So, in terms of one of my functions, I think that one of my functions here is to try to, help people polish their scholarly writing. I mean, and so like, for example, one of what I was taught when I had Mrs. Hanlon in 1980 at Louisville High School, she was quite brutal, but she was quite good. And she used to teach college writing. And she was also teaching, I learned later, she was teaching also courses at Kent State University. So she, this is what she would say. Typically, when you use scholarly writing, you don't want to use first person.
Mm-hmm.
So I could actually just say this again, and in case we make more changes, of course, send it to you. This after we're done here. So, we can just, so avoid, like I said, avoid use of first person. I mean, and so on in scholarly writing, because it reminds the scholarly reader he or she is reading opinions. Avoiding it reduces unnecessary verbiage. Also, so when you the word limit is there because partly one of the reasons why it's there is because I found that also when I have to stick to a word limit, I tend to learn more because I have to be very clear in my own thoughts, what I'm trying to say, and whether you keep it under the word limit that I've been set for. Like, if there's one publisher that that I simply insist that the body text of an article must not be more than 8,000 words. So, and I'm always like at 7,999 or 8,000 words. So every word has to be chosen, and I can see why they do that. But so that's why it's always good to get rid of unnecessary verbiage. So, like I said, I'll send this again to you so I can just cut this out, just to work on it a little bit more. And go. So the matter of European putting out or barring peace in Europe is a complex matter. A simple yes or no cannot be answered to such a question. What was the question?
European, like, does it? Yeah. Does the European Union foster peace in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, and so we go to midterm. Where's the midterm paper here? Just to remind us what area the midterm exam. And so what does that? I gotta go like this here. I go here. Yeah. So it received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 after second class material. Europeanization builds peace in Europe. So go back to your paper then, and so it's not, again, that's kind of an issue. I have to keep doing this, flipping around like this. But okay, so peace in Europe is like a clock. Each gear and cog has its place, like each country has its place in Europe. Well, that's whatever is interesting. That's interesting to make that point. And I thought it was interesting, I guess, because I like that notion that each country has its gear and cog. What do you mean by that? Rather than just to blather on here.
Yeah, so like I think each country is specific and like special in its own way, and it contributes a special thing to the European Union and Europeanization, while it integrates with other countries. So like each country has, even though some countries don't want the countries to be there, they are there and they have a place. And some nation states don't want other nation states, and some nations want to stay, but each nation that we have now has a place in Europe. Like I would say, I would make the argument for Ukraine that it has a place in Europe.
Yeah.
That it has its own special qualities that it can bring to Europe.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I kind of mean.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of in your comments there that have provoked me in terms of thinking about, of course, what I think I might have mentioned in class about social identity theory. And Turner and Todgeville in the late 1970s and 80s produced this work about how people, in terms of, you're talking about society, not nation states, but how they manage their identities in terms of we compare ourselves with others, and then And then we engage in social creativity, social mobility, or social competition in response to that comparison. But comparison is negative. What do we do? We might try to assimilate into the favorite out group. So social mobility, social competitions. We try to defeat the out group in zero-sum competition. And then so this is what you talk about in terms of what it sounds like social creativity. That basically Europe has every country has a different function, but a critical function. Like you can't have. You mentioned a clock, right? That or a mechanism that you need everything that goes into it to make it work. And so that's, for example, the Germans, are known to be the economic foundation of Europe in terms of their financial system and their efficiency. But at the same time, France, and everybody knows that, but of course, for the longest time, France was portrayed as the country that provided the political cover to Europe, to Germany to integrate, as a victor in World War II, as a country that has nuclear weapons. Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
They developed under De Gaulle, and then Italy has its unique functions, and so of course, and so that's one way to understand. But then how do you deal with countries that are not part of the European Union, but that are supposedly part of Europe? Like, is Russia part of Europe?
Well, it has an effect on Europe, but
China is affecting it. I mean, there's not an easy answer. I just typically, whenever you ask like a silly, simple geography question, where does Europe stop? And they say the border between Europe and Asia is the Ural Mountains or the Volga River, and that means Moscow and St. Petersburg. They're all geographically part of Europe. I mean, in terms of what does geography mean? I mean, or in terms of impact. I mean, is the United States part of Europe? No, people say no, but man, the impact and the influence of U.S. on Europe has been tremendous, maybe more so than Russia's impact. But we consider, so that is a question about whether or not each country has its place in Europe, and who decides what that place is. Maybe that's the question, because I'm not really certain what I'm trying to say here. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in terms of each country has its place, and who decides what that place is? The other Europeans or the Americans, or both?
That's a great question.
I mean, that's Russia's suspicion. I think the Russian suspicion, basically, the European Union is an American appendage.
Yeah, that sounds correct. But everyone, I guess, would have their own different view on who decides. Like Ukraine would be like, Ukraine decides that I'm a part of Europe.
Yeah.
We decide.
Yeah.
And then Germany would be like, no, we decide that you're a part of Europe.
Yeah.
And then Russia would be like, it's the US who's decided that they're a part of Europe. It's the evil. Yeah, Sauron's deciding that Ukraine is now a part of Europe. Yeah. So I'd say everyone has their own. It's complicated, as is everything.
Yeah. Well, in terms of peaceful conflict resolution, if that's like understanding to be like the primary concern for human civilization, that if we don't figure out how to resolve our conflicts without deadly violence, we're going to eventually use nuclear weapons again. And I don't know where that's going to end. But other than besides horrible suffering for many thousands, but if not millions, what does why do we care? And I guess that's an important issue. Like, for example, well, let's just aside from the grammar issues and the use of first and second person, just to get rid of this. However, set that clock on fire and have it roll downhill, and the world witnesses, or Europeans witness. That reason I did this because I don't want to just tell you how I would write it, because then that's not so much a question, an issue for native speakers, but like, for example, Koreans, somebody once said to me that if you want to help Koreans polish their English, you can't just tell them how to write something. They have to own it. So you can make suggestions about how to say something and offer them at least two suggestions, and then they can choose it how they want to say it. So that's what I've done here. It's up to you what you want to do. However, set that clock on fire and have it rolling down a hill, and the world witnesses, or Europeans witness, the same situation at present over Quang.
Yeah.
So what do you prefer? Not the
either
one's
world.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we can just clock it out. The world witnesses the same over Ukraine. So Yeah, so you want to, get to the point, so you don't need to say this, you want to get that 500 word or plus or minus 50 words. The EU has played a part into why the crisis has not escalated further, or the crisis has not escalated World War III. That's an interesting point, that basically you're saying that the situation could already be worse. I mean, you provoke a lot of thought in terms of things that I've been thinking about over the years. And insofar, for example, as if one were to try to explain in terms of why the Cold War ended peacefully, one part of it, not the only, but one critical part of an explanation has to be the fact that the Soviet leadership under Gorbachev, long before you were born, came to view the Europe and Germany in particular not as a threat. And European integration has to be part of an explanation as to why it was that in the late 1980s, Gorbachev and the Soviet leadership were not so concerned about Western Europe, about what Germany did to them in 2 world wars, and the fact that Germany really was a different place. And so you can make that argument that basically European integration has to be part of an explanation, not the only part of an explanation, but a critical part, a necessary but not sufficient, but necessary part of an explanation as to why the Cold War ended peacefully. And so it played a peace function there, but then something appears to have happened since 1991 on Christmas Eve, when the Soviet Union disappeared. Since then to the present. And people argue, have different views about, obviously, what has happened. But basically, the Soviet Union and the Soviet leadership, never really reconciled itself to its loss of empire, or did the people that criticize the United States say, well, it was the fact the United States basically saw an opportunity to expand into Europe and establish hegemony. And you can say, well, what's wrong with American hegemony? What's so wrong with it? I mean, look what American hegemony has done to the French and Germans. I mean, the French and Germans either were preparing for war, fighting war, or recovering for 1,000 years. And they stopped in 1945. Why? Well, partly because the American hegemony is there, right? I mean, so what's so bad about American hegemony?
A lot.
Well, I mean, why a lot? Like where? Yeah. Vietnam, okay, but the Americans got their nose bloodied in Vietnam, right? So the Soviets could say, well, you learned your lesson. But I guess maybe what the argument might be that the Soviet Union, the Moscow leadership, during the Cold War, they viewed Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Assad's Syria and Muammar Gaddafi's Libya as allies.
Yeah.
That these countries and the Americans destroyed
most of them.
Well, and so you say, well, what's so wrong with that? Was Saddam Hussein a great guy? Used to call him the Pol Pot of the Middle East in terms of how many people used to kill in Iraq. But from the I think, and this is something to investigate. I haven't looked at the Soviet Moscow leadership. They look at what the United States have done, for example, in the Middle East, and they see that basically the Americans have basically, destroyed the secular, authoritarian, radical regimes, militant regimes in Iraq and Syria and Libya that were secular Arab nationalists, and destroyed them, and opened up all of this oxygen for militant Islamist movements. But the United States is to blame is largely to blame for political Islam. And there's 1.5 billion or maybe 2 billion Muslims in the world. I don't know. And there's like tens of millions of them still in Russia. And we're not talking about Central Asia, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, those former Soviet republics that were created out of the Russian Empire. But just in Russia itself, like if you talk Tatarstan or Chechnya, and these countries, in Afghanistan, and they're a lot closer to Russia than they are to the United States. And the Americans basically have, from a conspiratorial point of view, of conspiracy theories in Moscow, they think this is all part of an American plot. And this is what, for example, supporters of Assad in Syria claim that the Americans, they're responsible for political Islam. That they did this on purpose because they wanted to create such chaos and turmoil in the Middle East that the Americans would be able to expand and conquer more of the Middle East. And so, for example, from the Russian point of view, I guess to some extent they share that. But you look at what has happened in the last 21 years since the September 11, 2001 attacks. The Americans have basically occupied Baghdad. They've destroyed a pro-Soviet government that were traditionally pro-Soviet under Assad, under Saddam Hussein, and they've allied with different groups to basically ensconce themselves in Baghdad in that area. They've knocked out Libya, and they basically, working with their local clients in Libya, they're trying to do the same thing in Syria, which was another pro-Soviet ally. And so the Russians, sent their military there, but from their, from the point of view, like for example, what would stop the United States from encouraging another Islamist uprising in Chechnya, which the Russians put down in that, because Chechnya is one of the 88 republics of the Russian Federation, by allying with a real nasty client, Razman Kadyrov, that if the Americans basically are destabilizing all of Eurasia through their actions, and ultimately aiming to instigate political Islam inside the Russian Republic, the Russian Federated Republic itself. And I'm not saying that's true, but I guess how much of, even if one argues that the Russians are not really trying to conquer Eurasia, but what they see as a threat, what do they see a threat to? They see a threat, is a matter of that they want to be treated with it as an equal with the Americans. And they don't like the Americans, basically taking over their turf, and they want their turf because they're a great power. And or is it also how much of it is that basically they see a more serious threat even over turf, that the Americans basically and NATO would somehow encourage different groups within the Russian Federation, because that's Russia is the dominant ethnic group, obviously in Russian Federation, but there's a lot of different ethnic groups in that country. In terms of Tatarstan is a republic. I mentioned Chechnya already. The Caucasus, the North Caucasus, where the Russians. There's a lot of Muslims that live there. I guess if I'm going to make an argument that Europe basically is seen as a source of threat to Russia, a threat to what? Is it national dignity and prestige, or is it national security and defense, or a threat to Russian regime stability of Vladimir Putin and his ruling clique, or all three? And which of those is more important than the other? If and I think that's a question I've been struggling with myself. And why is not, in terms of a peace strategy for Europe, why is the European Union not seen as a useful ally for Russia? Not, in fact, seen as a threat, because it was when Ukraine signed an association agreement with the European Union, not with NATO, with the European Union in 2013, that the Russians, I think I might have pointed out more than once in class, right? That back when Viktor Yanukovych was running was president, he became president in a free and fair election. Everybody admits it was a free and fair election in Ukraine, and he promised when he was running for president that his political base was Eastern Ukraine, where the more pro-Russian elements are located, that he would agree to sign an association agreement with the European Union. He kept promising and promising. And then in 2013, he went to Brussels and said he couldn't sign. And he couldn't sign because he was being pressured by Putin, who was president, of course, of Russia. And Putin was putting this economic squeeze on Ukraine because the Ukrainian economy is still tightly tied to the old Soviet infrastructure, Soviet supply. Russian supplies for commodities, fuel, electricity, parts for Ukrainian factories. And Putin started pressure and putting sanctions on Yanukovych to try to prevent him from signing an association agreement. So he gave up and he went to Brussels and said, I can't sign after all this pressure was put on him. And that's when the protests from the Ukrainian nationalists began in what they call the Euromaidan, European Union, the Maidan Square in Kiev, what they also call the Revolution of Dignity is what they're calling it. And then demanding, because they claim that he lied, he said the campaign was going to sign that, he's going to do, and then he didn't. And he had his reasons. I mean, he was under all this pressure. And then some, we don't know fully what happened, but the protests escalated, and then the police in his government, somebody ordered them to fire on the protesters. Like 100 college students, young people got killed and they're like memorialized now. And it was on that response that he left, he ran away, and he's now living in Russia somewhere. And of course, during those protests that eventually were put down with police bullets, or tried to be put down, the Victoria Nuland, Obama's Assistant Secretary of State, went to those protests and was literally giving food. Like, here's some sandwiches. Yes, protest against Yanukovych. And Herman van Rompuy, the first president of the European Council under the Lisbon Treaty, he went there and did the same. John McCain, Senator John McCain, who was
that's what I remembered.
He went there, and nobody's talking about this now, about how this guy was democratically elected. He made a decision under all this pressure, and then all these high-profile people from the United States went there to encourage the protests. And so, from Putin's point of view, this is not fair.
So the three things that they see that we could see as like, from their point of view, a threat. So like the threat to Russian nationalism, the threat to Putin and his inner circle. What was it there?
Threats to Russian irredentism and Russian irredentism. Those. I mean, look, we're not talking about objective facts. We're talking about subjective perceptions.
Yeah.
That appears to be strong in Moscow today. That Ukrainians are something which, oh God, I keep thinking about Yugoslavia. It's something that the communists created. That there wasn't really a strong Ukrainian identity until the communists, in their plans to rule the Soviet Union, wanted to weaken the power of Russia within the Soviet Union, because Russia was too big compared to all the other nations in the old Russian Empire. Mm-hmm. And they need to pacify everybody else in the Soviet Union by convincing them that this isn't some new version of the Russian Empire. So we're going to create a big, strong Ukraine, and we're going to create 5 Central Asian republics. There was no, the Tsarist regime did not create Kazakhstan. That was something that Lenin and Stalin came up with. And they had their justifications. It was just called Turkestan, East Turkestan in the Russian Empire. And the point is that that was always part of this effort. So from Putin's point of view, the Ukraine, not only, even I remember when I was in school, right, that Ukraine is where the Russian people were formed. What's today Ukraine in terms of the Kievan Rus? When the Vikings under Rurik in the 1,000 years ago conquered that area, the Varangians they were called. The Vikings were everywhere; they were conquering everything. But they in Normandy and southern Italy, and they even went to Greenland and Newfoundland, and then it was the Vladimir Monomach, the Vladimir the Great, who I think was he accepted Greek Christianity, and that began, and so
his mom was Olga, Saint Olga,
well, I'd have to go back and check. I'm sure Wikipedia has all that stuff on there, but she was
the one who brought Christianity, at least according to their church.
Yeah.
Saint Olga of Kiev was the one who brought Christianity to Russia,
uh-huh.
or to the surrounding area. She was the first person to be, I think, baptized by the Pope,
or probably by the Orthodox.
Yeah, the Orthodox, like bishop,
the Byzantine Empire.
Someone.
Yeah. So so I know this is complicated. I know, but the thing is, if you're going to, but the issue that it is for me, insofar as so much of the discussion that's going on in Ukraine now, is that it's basically because Putin's a jerk. It's all Putin. He's a bloodthirsty, violent, and I know he is. He might well be, like Hitler was a horrible creature. But any explanation for anything that happens in national relations has to have factors at all 3 levels of analysis, 3 levels of causation. And otherwise, we're not, we're going to have a social competition, zero-sum conflict, and this could escalate to God knows what. I mean, from their point of view, you can imagine scenarios that if Putin thinks he's losing in Ukraine, and they're losing, that they could basically make the West agree to a settlement by, like, they're talking about, you can imagine where they detonate a nuclear weapon somewhere. So you're gonna because we're sending in now, we're sending artillery pieces, 155 millimeter howitzers there. Well, I mean, and so it's going to be more and more Russian soldiers are going to die. And from Putin's point of view, we're going to have this. Who knows how they're going to respond? I mean, they're just going to basically accept. I mean, and I'm not saying that Putin's right or anybody's right and wrong. That's not my first concern. My first concern is basically, well, it might be too late, like in Boston. Basically, they're going to have to partition. I mean, I heard that on the radio this morning. They were talking about basically there's going to be some kind of partition of Ukraine.
Yeah, I heard that.
Basically, but we only have a few minutes left here, so I should ask you: do you have any questions?
What's the book that you mentioned? The 1980s social thing?
What's that book? What did I mention? What book was that?
The social creativity, social.
Oh yeah, that's just from my book that I use all the time, and I mean, Turner and Hodgson are not real scientists, and but it's this book that where it applies. That book's 21 years old, right? But if you're interested in looking at further in terms of this, if you're like a psychology major, you can look up. Oh, I know. What did I look up here? Social identity theory. What comes up here? Well, I think they did, or maybe print.
Oh,
social identity theory against the complex social identity. Yeah, Henry Tajfel and John Turner, and they. And so if you type in social identity theory, social creativity, and like in the ProQuest, lots of stuff will come up, and it's used in business, it's used in marketing strategy. How to get people to like your product in terms of appealing to their identity, being different but equal, because that's what social creativity means, is basically making people feel different but equal in status. But as applied to nationalism, that's not done by them. That's done by them. Cottom, she wrote a textbook that's a standard use textbook in social political psychology, right? If I look up Martha Cottom, and the latest edition came out in 2015. I mean, this is the standard textbook on political psychology that she produced. And I went to a summer school on political psychology with her back in 1995 in the summer. And so that's the third edition. But but again, she's retired. I was surprised to see. Anyway, but and then she did something on here in the Middle East, and so that's her father, Richard Cottom. He died in '97, but he was an Iran expert. And
wasn't that your professor?
Yeah. So, but so I guess since again, I don't know if somebody's supposed to come in here at 1 o'clock. Let me see what I got scheduled here, because if nobody's coming in at the time. But, what did I do? Did I close that? So yeah, do you have any other questions? Okay, so somebody's supposed to come in at 1 o'clock. So.
Okay.
So I guess
Polish it up, make it more scholarly, refine my points.
Well, in terms of citations, I would stick to the book and stick to the reading and to make your points.
Okay.
And because of 500 words, 550, that's pretty short, That's pretty. And so you don't really have a lot of space. So let me. How do you spell? What's your name?
Yeah. or EES.
Oh, there it is,
Yeah,
okay.
EES blend,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. Okay, and like this, like here, go here. Okay, let me see if she's out there.
And if you want a, I don't know if you read this, but
Bye.
sorry,
Uh-huh.
there's a Yuval Harari, 21st lessons from the
Yeah.
20. He talks about geopolitical differences. It's really cool. I got some inspiration from that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Oh, my bad.
Uh-huh.
Whoops.
Bye.
Sorry, Sarah.
Okay.
No, it's fine. All right, thank you.
One in. Okay, so let me open up your paper here.
Yep.
And